Welcome back. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about order of operations. So after the lesson, you'll be able to simplify numerical expressions using order of operations and evaluate expressions using some substitution. So let's start with some of this vocabulary because those are some words you might not have heard in a while, and we're going to introduce some other words that we're going to use a lot this semester. So the first thing we need to talk about is what a variable is. You've worked with variables before. Variables are symbols. It's a symbol for a number we don't know. We use variables a lot in algebra because the whole study of algebra is figuring out unknown values, trying to solve problems and figure out values of things we don't know. So we use variables a lot. We're also going to be using exponents a lot. Exponents are, the idea of an exponent is how many times to multiply a given number, which we call the base. So for example, if I have something like 8 to the third power, the 3 here, that is going to be my exponent. And the 8 here, that is going to be my base. That's about as much as we need to know for exponents. For now, we're going to talk a little bit about how we evaluate that in the calculator and what that kind of looks like written out here in a minute. Speaking of evaluate's a word we're going to see a lot, especially in directions. Directions will say things like evaluate the given problem or just straight evaluate. So evaluate has the word value in it. You can kind of see that VALU. So the whole point of evaluating is to calculate the value. You guys have maybe heard of this as plug and chug, where you plug a value in and you get a value out. So we're going to see some examples of that in a minute too. So here's some first vocabulary for us to think about. I'd like us to also add at the bottom of your paper, skip this table for a second, but we're going to write in, I forgot to put this on the notes, expression. This is something we're going to be working with a lot as well. What's an expression? So an expression is a number, symbols, and operations grouped together. Okay. So we're going to have these words in our back pocket. Okay, so with that said, let's start off with some basic exponent rules. We're going to be working with exponents, so it's really important that we understand how they work and what they look like. So number one, this first problem, 3 to the 5th power. That's how we say this. I'm going to start with that first. So 3 to the 5th is how we say this problem out loud. When I say extended product here, right here, this extended product, what I'm referring to is what that 3 to the 5th means. So 3 to the 5th means that we're going to have 3 and we're going to multiply it by itself 5 times. So 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. Okay. And when I say evaluate right here, that is what I'm looking for what that expression is simplified. So what is 3 to the 5th power? What is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3? Well, we can go to back to our calculator and we could type in 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. We could do that, hit enter and get 243. Or we could hit the 3 and then we can hit this button underneath clear that looks kind of like a hat. And it's going to pop up an exponent place in your calculator. Type in 5, hit enter, and notice you get the same thing. So 3 to the 5th power means the same thing as 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 is 3. and that's going to be 243. So when we evaluate this, we get 243. Okay, the next one, my extended product of 4 to the third is going to be 4 times 4 times 4. And I could say 4 to the third, but whenever we have a 3 as an exponent, we can say 4 cubed. Means the same thing. And 4 to the third power is 64. Again, we could do 4 times 4 times 4, or we could just type in 4 tilde 3 into our calculator and get 64. The next two are a little bit trickier. This next one is saying parentheses -2 squared. So what that's saying is it's saying -2 times -2, both in parentheses. Okay, we're still going to say it's going to be -2 squared. When we have an exponent of 2, we call that squared. And what is a negative times a negative? What's -2 times -2? +4. Okay, the important part is that when you put this into your calculator, you need to make sure that you put the -2 in parentheses, then put the exponent 2 outside the parentheses to get that +4, as you can see in the calculator. The last problem here is highlights an issue if you don't use the parentheses. So in this particular problem, -5 to the fourth. So that's how we're going to say that out loud. -5 to the fourth. That has a negative in front, but then it's just going to be 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. We don't include that negative in every single 5 because the negative isn't fully underneath that exponent of 4. So if we want to put this in the calculator, this is a time where it's okay not to use the parentheses, -5 to the fourth. And notice how each of these looks exactly like it is on the paper. I didn't add parentheses in where there weren't any. I didn't put a parenthesis -5. I just left it. So I get -625. Okay. So that's an overview, very simple overview of how we work with some exponents and some vocabulary revolving around exponents. Okay. Let's move on to evaluating. So like I said before, evaluating is calculating that value of something, plugging and chugging. So the really key part of evaluating, that's going to be that we use parentheses when we plug things in. So let's make a note here is that when we evaluate, well, we don't need to write that right now. We can write that we need to use parentheses when plugging in. And so here's what I mean by that. Okay, so if I have the number 4 here, it's saying evaluate if x equals 4. So x equals 4, so that means I'm going to replace that x with a 4. When I do that, I'm going to have parentheses for -5. Okay, so when I put this into my calculator, or I can realize that if 4 is by itself, then I can go ahead and drop that parentheses and just write 4 minus 5, put little equal signs here, and 4 minus 5 is -1. And if you're not sure here what 4 minus 5 is, we should work on that skill, developing some of that number sense. But also, if you're really not sure, I'm okay with using the calculator for these sorts of things. I really, truly am. There's no judgment here for me. It's always good to practice number sense, but at the same time, calculators are there to help us when we need it. So it's okay to use a calculator here if you need that, okay? All right, letter B, 2 times x. So now I'm still replacing that x now with 4. So when I plug it in, I'm going to have 2 times parentheses 4. And what is 2 times 4? It is 8. So when x equals 4, 2x equals 8. Okay, remembering that when we have a number, any two things bumped up right next to each other, it means multiplication. So it means multiply. So there's like a little invisible dot in between those two things. Okay. 6, the next example, 6 minus x, I am plugging it in for the x here. So I'm going to have 6 minus parentheses 4, which is just the same thing as 6 minus 4, which is 2. Okay, so Simple plugging and chugging, getting a value after we plug in something else, plugging in something for a variable. Okay. Example 3, evaluate now if x equals -4. So now we're dealing with something a little trickier, and that's if, well, what if x is a negative number? This just means we have to be a lot more careful. So for letter A, we're going to have -4 minus 5. We can drop the parentheses because there's nothing in front of it. So then I have just -4 minus 5. That's going to give me -9. I owe you $4 and I owe you 5 more, I owe you $9. So those two negatives are going to give you a negative when you subtract them. Okay. And I'll go ahead and highlight that this was the x you're plugging into. So for B, it's 2x again, but now we're going to have 2 times -4, and 2 times a positive times a negative is a negative. So I end up with -8 this time instead of +8. And then for letter C, I'm still doing that 6 minus x, so I'm going to have 6. Now here we need to be really careful of using parentheses because we're going to have the negative from the problem and then the negative from x being -4. So I'm going to have 2 negatives when I plug -4 in. It's really important to notice this. We can remember that when we have 2 negatives, they do turn into a positive. So 6 minus -4 becomes 6 plus +4, which is 10. Okay, it's really important to remember that 2 negatives make a positive. It's going to make math a lot easier. But if we were to go into our calculator and do 6 minus parentheses -4 into our calculator, you're going to see that you're also going to get positive 10 there as well, as long as you are putting it into your calculator properly and carefully. Okay. So now let's go on. Now that we've gotten some of these key things under our belt, let's talk about order of operations. You've probably seen a lot of these types of problems on TikTok or other videos where there's a string of numbers and symbols and you're trying to see, oh, what is the actual answer here? Do I do division first? Do I do multiplication first, addition first? Well, here is how we do these orders so you guys can get those videos right every time. So the first thing we do when we do order of operations is grouping. You've probably heard PEMDAS before in school. I call it GEMDAS because there are other symbols that are grouped that are not just parentheses. So I'm just going to, in general, call this grouping symbols. Okay, those grouping symbols can be parentheses, but they can also be brackets. They could also be radicals considered a group. They can be absolute value, or they can even be a parentheses, or sorry, a fraction bar, okay, where you have one group on top and you have another group on the bottom. And we're going to see that today. Okay, so a big fraction can be considered a group on top and a group on bottom. So that's always the first thing we want to do when we are performing operations. The second thing, the E, it stands for exponents. So you do exponents next. Okay. After you're done with exponents, you're going to do multiplication and division. Okay, now here is the trick with multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. You perform them as you read them left to right. It is not multiplication first and then division second. Okay, it doesn't work that way. It's how it reads left to right. So if division becomes first, then multiplication is second, you do that division first, then you do the multiplication. Okay, I think that's kind of a misconception in order of operations. The same thing with addition and subtraction. Addition and subtraction come last, but we do them as we read left to right. So if subtraction comes first in the line, you do subtraction. If addition comes first in the line, you do addition. It's left to right, not just add and then subtract always. I think that's a big misconception I've seen with students. Okay, so let's look at some examples of simplifying using order of operations. Okay, so example 4 is saying 6 minus parentheses 5 minus -6. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make those two negatives positive. because that's what's inside the group. The group is the parentheses. So I'm just going to bring this 6 minus down, leave the parentheses, and what is 5 plus 6? That's 11. Okay, that is mine. I'm going to even off to the right here, put like, okay, grouping was my first step. Now my second step is going to be that subtraction there, and 6 minus 11 is negative 5. Okay. Letter B, I've got two groups here, so I'm going to do both of those groups first. So negative 3 plus 5 gives me positive 2, and I'm going to leave that in the parentheses. And negative 1 minus 6 gives me negative 7. Put little equal signs here. Okay. And then now my next step is going to be multiplication. So 2 times negative 7 is negative 14. Okay. Letter C, I've got a group, subtraction, and division happening. So the first thing I'm going to do is my group, which is that 10 minus 4. So I'm going to go ahead and do 10 minus 4, which is 6. And then I've got 6 times 2 divided by 2. That's what I've got left. Well, I know I have multiplication and division. I read it left to right. So I'm going to do multiplication first. So 6 times 2 is going to give me 12. Bring that divided by 2. Now I can do my division, and 12 divided by 2 is going to be 6. Okay. Letter D, I've got exponents, multiplication, some addition, subtraction, but no grouping. So I can skip grouping and I can go straight to dealing with my exponent. So keep the 1, keep the plus, but 2 squared now becomes 4. Minus 7 times 2. Now I'm going to do my multiplication. So I keep the 1, keep the plus 4, and this becomes minus 14. Now I'm going to do my addition. So I get 5 minus 14. And then I'm going to do my subtraction to end it. 5 minus 14 is negative 9. E is a little tricky. I would say E is one of the harder ones we're going to do, because even though you don't see any big groups, like a big set of parentheses, like I said a little bit earlier, a fraction is considered a group on top and a group on the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to first look and pretend, I'm going to pretend like this is one big group up here, that whole thing is one big group. And we can even write that down, that it is one big group up top here. Okay, so I'm going to deal with what's inside that group first. And what's inside that group happens to be a 5 square, which is my exponent. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my equal sign here. And I'm going to do, I'm going to keep my 3 times the 25. Then plus 5 squared is 25. And then keep it over 50. Going to keep working on my group up there, so I'm going to do the multiplication next, which is 3 times 25, which is 75. Keeping that 50 on the bottom because I'm still working with my group up top. My group up top is 75 plus 25, so that's going to be 100. Keep the 50, and then finally I can do that division. That fraction means division, so 100 divided by 50 is going to be 2. That's probably one of the harder ones that we do, is dealing with simplifying fractions like that, one step at a time. Okay. Letter F, I have this group 1 minus 3 squared, but I'm going to keep the 1/2, keep the 1, but I'm going to do that exponent first. So 3 squared is 9. Now I can do 1 minus 9. 1 minus 9 is negative 8. And then 1/2 times negative 8. Remember, there's like an invisible dot here, like an invisible multiplication symbol. 1/2 times negative 8 is going to be negative 4. And we talked about how if you don't know what 1/2 times 8 is, then you can use your calculator, and how we talked about making sure that you put that 1/2 in parentheses when you put it in your calculator. Okay. The last thing that we're going to do in this lesson today is evaluate using order of operations. So we just talked about using order of operations if you're given all of the values. Well, what happens if you're not? What happens if you're given a variable and you have to plug it in? So in this case, I am given 5x plus 4 when x equals 2. So how I'm going to write this is I'm going to write 5x, but instead of the x, I'm going to replace it with a set of parentheses. So that means the 2 goes inside of here, bring down the plus 4. Okay. Then we're going to do 5 times 2, which gives us 10. Bring down the plus 4, and 10 plus 4 is 14. So when x equals 2, 5x plus 4 gives you 14. Okay. Letter B says, what's 6x squared minus 13 when x equals negative 3? So we're going to keep everything else but that x squared. We're going to keep the 6, replace the x with a parentheses, and plug in negative 3. Keep the squared, keep the minus 13. Okay. So with GEMDAS, we don't have any groups. We do have that exponent. So remembering that this is like a little invisible multiplication symbol, keep that 6, keep the multiplication symbol. What does negative 3 squared become? Positive 9. Then bring down that minus 13. Now we'll do the multiplication. 6 times 9, which is 54. 54 minus 13, that's going to give us 41. Okay. And then finally, what happens if we want to plug in we have 2 variables we want to plug in. This should not say 5a. It should say 5x. That is a typo on my part. My apologies. So in this case, what we're wanting to do is I'm going to put an equal sign, and I'm going to replace the x here with a 3. Keep the 3 that's cubed. Keep the minus 21. On the bottom, I'm going to keep the 5, replace that x, which was an a, with a 3, and then plus 9. Now I've got a couple things going on here. I've got the top group and I've got the bottom group. The top group, I can say 3 cubed is 27. So 27 minus 21. And then 5 times 3 is 15 plus 9. Okay. When I do this math, on top, the subtraction gives me 8. And on the bottom, I get 24. And when I reduce this fraction, 8 divided by 24, I'll remind you in the calculator, if I do 8 divided by 24 in the calculator, I get that decimal, but if I do math, enter, I get 1/3. So my answer to this problem is 1/3. Okay. So this is a trickier one, I think. It requires some caution. It requires being careful. And again, like I said, please feel free to use your calculator when you need to, and always come up and ask for questions if you need it. Good luck.